Hello and welcome to Fintech Impact. I'm your host, Jason Pereira. Today on the show, I have Julie Littlechild, founder and CEO of Absolute Engagement. Julie is a well-known speaker and authority when it comes to client engagement in the financial advisory space. And she's parlayed that into a new venture, the Absolute Engagement Engine, that helps basically manifest a lot of what she has been talking about for a long time. And with that, here's my interview with Julie. Julie, thanks for your time today.
Oh, thrilled to be here. Thanks, Jason.
Always a pleasure to spend time chatting with you. So, Julie Littlechild, basically tell us about the Absolute Engagement Engine.
Well, we're just a little bit excited about this, I have to tell you. And the engine we created to help advisors to connect at a much deeper level with their prospects and clients, but to do that efficiently and consistently. So in essence, it's a tool to help them capture sentiment at every stage of the journey, automatically uncover engagement and growth opportunities, and take action.
Okay, excellent. Basically, I feel like that's your checklist for what you would tell people to do exactly. So perfect. All right. So for those of us listening who don't know, for people who don't know who you are, let's give you your history. Not just, usually we just talk about the history of the product, but you have a much more lengthy history in the advisory industry. So talk about that and let's talk about what led you to the product.
Yeah, I've been in this industry for 25 years or so, have always been in and around the space of helping advisors to deliver a better experience to their prospects and clients. And over time, that evolved when I started my own business into a hyper focus really on the role that the voice of the client plays in that. There's a lot of different ways to deliver a great experience. Our focus is very much on how do we integrate the voice of the client, how, when, and where, and what do we do with that information to drive the experience. For most of my career, we have focused on working with advisory firms to sort of, quote, do client surveys. It was a professional services business. It was very successful, and we continue to work with a lot of clients in that way to really understand, on an annual survey, for example, what their clients are thinking and what they need. The evolution of this, however, into the engine really came about because of our own research, which we do every year with investors, and the realization that if we're going to drive deeper engagement, like beyond satisfaction, we need to really tease out not just if clients are happy with the relationship and how often they want to meet, but how are they really feeling? What's keeping them up at night? How do they think about the future? If we could get to those sentiments, then we could use that to drive deeper conversations and a better experience. The challenge is those kinds of sentiments are very fluid and they differ within couples and they change over time. And that meant we needed a different kind of technology to support our ability to capture those sentiments sort of in real time and understand what to do with them. And so we evolved the business into what we have today with the engine.
Excellent. So basically, you're telling everybody to do everything. I'm going to sum this up probably. You're telling everybody to do everything, and telling people to do something is one thing. Doing it for them increases the probability of action. Mm-hmm. And taking all the wonderful stuff that you've worked on over the years and basically productizing that effectively, mm-hmm. right? Mm-hmm. So excellent. So let's talk about the experience that it is to work with this product. So from a client perspective, what are they seeing? And then we'll talk about from the advisor perspective and the benefits.
From the client perspective, they are being invited to share targeted, relevant input at each stage of the journey. So when I say that, what I mean is as they are visiting a website as a lead, as they're coming in for an introductory meeting as a prospect, as they're being onboarded, as they're coming into a review for a client, they're being invited. If it's an individual as an individual, if it's a couple separately for each of those, to share 2 to 3 minutes of input that is very focused on that stage of the journey and how they're thinking and feeling at that time. And to some extent, that's it for the client. They're just sharing their input and they're getting that back in the form of a targeted agenda or deeper insights on how they're feeling, and definitely a better conversation with the advisor.
Excellent. So, okay. So that's the feeling. So let's talk about the actual kind of questions you're asking and what it is you're trying to really you're digging into sentiment and happiness and all this other stuff. But let's dig into what it is that you are asking. In particular, how is that message potentially being modified or being targeted at different groups to really kind of get the underlying sentiment?
So when we think about sentiments, we tend to group them into a few categories, although there's probably many different variations of this. And the one thing I'd say is, first of all, we start with recommendations, but this is a fully configurable technology. So any advisor could have a different set of questions and a different set of communications based on their clients and their understanding of their clients and their needs. But effectively, we're looking at confidence. How are they feeling about the future? Concerns, what keeps them up at night? Outlook, when they look forward, is it with fear or excitement or pessimism or optimism? We're looking at preferences around communications and expectations, and broadly what we call perspectives, which is a bit of a catch-all, but a perspective might be something like, does your plan really reflect what's fundamentally most important to you and your family right now? All right. So we're trying to get at those types of questions as well. So that's how we define sentiments.
Okay, fair enough. I mean, really, these are the kind of areas or topics that, of course, we should be understanding about our clients.
Mm-hmm.
The traditional product-focused industry doesn't really care about that, but the industry's evolved for many advisors to basically learn how to basically look to be aware of that. But it's something else to structure the conversation in the format of a questionnaire, right? We hear these things, oh, you should be doing all that, but some people find those conversations awkward. Some people find those conversations, they just aren't trained to think about how to when do I surface this in a questionnaire, right?
Yeah.
So I mean, you're kind of giving us a nice package structure for how to handle that.
Absolutely. I mean, how do I do this consistently? If I have a firm with 10 or 20 advisors, how do I make sure that is being done to some extent consistently across all of those advisors? But the one nuance there, which is really interesting, is we had two firms who have been with us from day one on this journey as the beta and the pilot and now clients. And I would argue that some of them are the best I know at connecting with people. So you could argue, well, why do they need this? What they told me was, it just makes it more efficient. So rather than spending half my time with the client trying to tease out, which I have the skills to do, I just don't have the time to do it. Now we walk into that meeting knowing exactly where to go, and it's a better conversation, but we get there faster.
Yeah, it's funny. That is the one thing that comes up with a lot of these things is that if you care about this stuff, you care about it, and you're probably doing it on some level. If you don't care about it, there's no product in the world that's going to make you care about it on some level. So
100%. Yeah. So I was having a conversation with Joe Duran recently, and we were talking through the technology, and I have to give him credit because the way he described it was you're deepening and shortening the trust cycle. And I thought, oh, I quite like that. So I'm absolutely going to steal that and use it.
Leave it to Joe to actually come up with something that
in 5 minutes or less, right?
Yeah. Once this manages to sum it all up, and we're like, oh yeah, that's exactly.
Oh, that's it. That's what I've been spent years trying to figure out. Thank you.
Yeah, no kidding. So anyway, so you're absolutely right. I mean, I think the fact that these questions are being asked, right, it's a demonstrated preference as to what actually matters to you, right? I mean, we're all going to ask about how much money do you have to invest? What is it worth? Those are the things. But it also it's those types of questions are important for us to get to do our job. But at the same time, they also demonstrate our priorities, right? What we're thinking about. Of course, the wealth management industry is about managing wealth and getting compensated on that. But if you're not demonstrating the softer pieces that people are caring about, then you're not showing. We all talk about caring being a thing that we all need to do, and it's it should be table stakes. But if we're not asking questions around that and demonstrating that in our interactions, then frankly, we're not. There's a disconnect between what we're saying, what we're doing. So it makes a lot of sense. So before I get into the advisor taking that and what they're doing with it, I take it, clients can take this thing over and over again. Are we benchmarking their sentiment trends over time?
Yeah. So when we think about what we define as just automatically uncovering the engagement and growth opportunities, those opportunities emerge for a few reasons, either because of the way a client shows up at a point in time. So if I come for a review meeting or it's an introductory meeting as a prospect and my confidence level is sort of in the middle, that's an opportunity. That alone is an opportunity to dig deeper. If I come in for a meeting and the advisor can see that the last time I came in, my confidence was high and now it's moderate, that change creates an opportunity to dig in. And then finally, if I'm moderate on confidence, but my partner sleeps like a baby at night, that difference is also an opportunity. So yes, we create scoring. We're tracking that over time, and we're looking both at the change and any gaps within couples. The couple thing is huge.
Absolutely. I mean, this is a common problem, right? The statistic constantly quoted is that was it like 2/3 of advisors will be fired by the spouse once
Yep.
the first one passes away. And when I say that, it's a net invariably based on demographics and everything else. The male who gets fired, who basically passes first, the female who gets fired, and oftentimes because again they feel unheard and unengaged with.
Absolutely.
It's amazing the things that we have to keep saying in the industry for decades that just don't seem to change, unfortunately.
Well, we say them, but we might not be sure what to do about it, right? And I think that's what we're trying to get to.
Well, I mean, it's too often I've heard that. And at the same time, it's like, well, if the spouse is sitting there not asking questions or not showing up to meetings, and you're like, oh, they're okay because they just want to leave it to the one spouse, it just means that the conversation is not of interest enough to them.
Bingo.
To show up. Yeah. And it's not that they're not interested in their welfare. It's that the way you're approaching it, they're not interested in it, or they're afraid of it, or whatever else it is. So, I mean, I've had many, not to toot my own horn, but I've had many conversations and like prospects and whatnot where spouses will say, well, I'm just here, or it's, exactly what he said. And my response every time they say that is like, I can appreciate that. And there's probably some truth to that. But the reality is that this is never going to work unless you and I have a dialogue. Yeah. So whether that's about your family or what you want to do on vacation, you may think that's not important to me. It is, because you're telling me what's important to you. And at the end of the day, if you don't care how you get there, as long as you get there, it's my job. Right.
Exactly. So can we tease that out before they sit down? That's sort of where we were going.
Right? Absolutely. So being able to give people that. So let's talk about, so they take this, they can track this, they can check their sentiment. Let's talk about the advisor actions and how this is being received. So I get this done with either leads or with existing clients or onboarding clients. And I'm given this report. What does the report look like? And what are the insights, or what are you trying to surface to them as quickly as possible to action on?
So again, the changes a little depending on the stage of the journeys. But so if it's a lead, just visiting a website or hearing about them, then the action is a trigger to the advisor that says you have a new lead. First of all, we're going to capture the contact details. You have a new lead, and this is what they care about right now. This is what's on their mind. So they're reaching out. If it's a prospect, the action is, here's an agenda that you can use in that introductory meeting, or talking points if you already have a process for agenda that will ensure that you have the deepest possible conversation. Same for clients. So typically it's either insights that you're sending back to that prospect or client, or we're feeding it into the agenda. That's the one-on-one immediate response. The secondary part is all of that data is being aggregated up to show you trends over time, which will trigger different, more strategic changes in the business potentially.
Yeah, it's okay. Perfect. And these are the things, again, the examples we gave. It's about walking into that meeting and knowing where to shoot, right? It's not 100%. Wondering about that, right? And oftentimes the common thing for that is to send an agenda and say, okay, this is my agenda, put whatever else you want on top of this. And, there's certain things that they will, like I have something upcoming or I'm not satisfied with whatever, but there's many things that they won't, right? Like because
they don't know what to say.
Exactly.
That's the problem that we have here. And it's just a human problem that we think we're doing this by saying, hey, how are you doing? How are you feeling? Anything on your mind? So we've ticked that box as an advisor. But if the client doesn't know how to respond, you're not going to get that insight. I think the underlying secret sauce of all of this is asking clever questions that actually tease out those needs rather than just, are you okay? You're good? Okay, let me move on to what I wanted to talk about.
There's the 10-point scale for the NPR, for the
NPS,
score, right? Like NPR, I'm listening to too much podcast. Yeah. So absolutely. So basically get this information, and it's similar to the same problem with goals. We sit across from clients. Okay, what are your goals? I want to retire, right?
Yeah, I want money.
I like travel. Not many people, only certain personality types can say, no, I don't like to travel. And beyond that, they're just these abstract, amorphous things that most people haven't basically thought about much. Yet we say it's the centerpiece of it all, yet we get very little information. So the more you're absolutely right, the more we can tease out deeper understanding of them, the better this is. So I kind of look at this as being on trend with, you're on trend with a couple of things. the ability to find, everybody's talking about finding deeper purpose and connection and moving kind of into the almost psychological realm of the aspects of financial planning, as it should be, because AI is going to automate most of the rest of the stuff, quite honestly.
Exactly.
And then the second piece of this, you're on trend there, because essentially what you're doing is you're basically detecting their emotional sentiment around the entirety of the experience, which to date has, quite frankly, been lacking, with the exception of surveys that are not as academically rigorous, I would say. I'm not saying you're an academic, but like, you've tested this, you've got, you've built the best practice, and you've got an entire career of this while simultaneously also feeding into the data trend, which is fantastic. Because now, if I can benchmark, I can benchmark this on aggregate on how satisfied my customers are, right?
Yeah. And here's where it gets really cool: is on the data side, you can benchmark it, you can track change, but then we can start layering in other data sources. Now we're inching toward predictive, right? If we can start to see how people have been feeling and thinking and mesh that with things like retention data, it starts to get really interesting.
Yep. So, and it's a key thing. So the retention data. So, I mean, I know it's early to the game, but I mean, you've been consulting in this field for a long time. Is there, what kind of stats or what kind of data do you have that you can point to as to show that firms that do this and act on it have higher retention? I mean, it's a no-brainer that they would, but do you have anything to support it right now on the second end?
The two things that come out, well, I mean, first of all, I would say that when we deal with large firms, the leadership cares very much about retention, but individual advisors tend not to, because retention is pretty high in this industry, right? So it tends not to be one of those. Exactly. It's not a hot button thing. Where we're leaning in is less about, are they on their way out now? We're trying to create a leading indicator of issues in future. And what we have been able to do is create a correlation between our confidence index and retention and net promoter score and satisfaction. And so that tells me that how I'm feeling right now could have a future impact. So deal with that right now. I'm not even identifying as dissatisfied. I'm identifying as struggling. And that's going to become dissatisfied at some point.
And again, you can, if that happens with one, that's not a big deal. If that is a trend, that's a very big deal. Yeah. So they're basically, okay. And to go back to the point of retention rates being really high, absolutely. I think that makes us lazy, right? I think it makes a lot of advisors lazy to say, well, yeah, my clients are happy and therefore they're not leaving. Well, dissatisfied clients don't just up and leave after one dissatisfying meeting. It's a culmination of things, because the friction to leaving is not low, right? Like going to, hunting the advisor down to figure out who you're going to work with, figuring that out, and then going through that person's process and then all the account transfers and all the setup. It's a pain. It's a pain.
Absolutely. Like you have to be drawn to something. It's a bit like being in a relationship, right? If there's nothing really bad happening, like, okay, well, but something else presents itself that is compelling, and then it becomes a little more. And that's the issue: is somebody going to step in and have these conversations with them? Because that'll be a game changer. I can give you a quick example. It was just from yesterday. I was talking to one of our clients who had a prospect coming in, and it was actually the first time they were using our prospect feature. They'd been using the client one. And we looked at the report together, and we asked the prospect, what do you want to talk about? As you do, because it's an agenda. And it was, I want to know what services you provide and how much you charge. Right? That was the question. And that would have been the end of it. However, we also asked about confidence and concerns, and you could see that confidence was marginal, that there were certain issues that was really concerning this person, and that became the conversation instead of services and fees. But it could have gone the wrong way.
Back to the point of like the counterpoint, like they don't know, right?
They don't know.
Often it ends up devolving to the fee argument every time, because the old saying, in the absence of value, there's price is an object, whatever. I can't screw that up entirely. Yeah. Right. So the reality is, but at the same time, not only do they not understand the value, or they're talking about services because that's something potentially tangible. That's
what they think of. Yeah,
exactly. Right. Like they're coming in with their best effort of what their lack of understanding is, when really, as we know, it's about the entire experience of the journey that they're going to have, and again, getting to the bottom of their concerns, right? So it's not surprising. Too often advisors get rolled their eyes like, well, the first thing they asked them was about fees, right? So then they think they got to be competitive on fees, when, and actually the conversation should never be about that. It should be about that 100%. Once the conversation of what you're going to do for it is done, and then they can actually make a value calculation in their mind.
Yeah, exactly.
So not surprising. So in general, okay, so basically now with your platform, I can send this out, I can detect sentiment, I can uncover the issue, I can find the disconnected clients, I can measure the trends, I know where to shoot. What's your advice on follow-up actions and how they take this? Besides just saying, hey, let's bull in the China shop this, I got this, you're concerned. What's your concern? Your spouse is disengaged. Let's engage the spouse. There's a reason why they're like that in the first place. So I have to think that doing the exact same thing, just more directly, is probably not going to work. So how do they change their approach?
Such a good question, because the reality is there is a soft skills overlay for what we're doing, right? And a lot of technology, frankly, in the same way. I mean, you could say that about planning software, right? If you don't have the ability to go deeper and have a deeper conversation about here are my assets and expenses and so on and so forth, it's not going to be that effective. So we're, as part of this, even though it's a technology, we've invested a lot of time and effort in just drawing on what we've always done to say, and here's how you have those conversations, and here's how you might follow up. So it's on-demand resources, and in some cases live training with our larger clients on exactly what to do with that information. Sometimes it's pretty easy, just we have a lead, call them. But this to me is I don't know if it's a gap, but it's an opportunity that we've got in our industry right now to dig deeper into how do I have different conversations with partners and with clients when these things emerge, because it scares some people, no doubt. It shouldn't, but it does.
Yeah, it does, because it moves. I think it's very easy to get into the realm of talking about product or planning or solutions, because frankly, that's not an emotional thing, right?
Yeah.
There's this entire discussion about the move into the behavioral side of finance, and there's the financial therapy aspects, which are even more frightening to some people. We're getting into soft, squishy, messy things that often are highly uncomfortable for people, right?
They can be, although they often link back to planning at the end of the day, right? Almost every one of these conversations. And you know what I think maybe the fear is that somehow we think we need to have the answer, but we don't, right? If I ask you where to invest, maybe you want to have an answer for that. But all advisors are doing in this case is having a process to give clients a space to identify and acknowledge and understand how they're feeling, and then to link that back to what they're trying to accomplish. If we can let go of that idea that I need to solve for all of these problems, I think it makes it a lot easier.
Yeah, I hear that. I mean, frankly, you said the first thing you said was it all links back to planning. Of course it does, because at some point the problem requires some form of action or support, whether it be for a solution or just to deal with the inevitable negative impact. And if someone's dying, I'm not going to be able to help with that. But can I absolutely, at the same time, be there to reassure them? Can I point the person I'm dealing with, the spouse, whoever it is, in the direction of someone who can help deal with their cycle, what their challenges they're facing right now because of what they're going through? Absolutely, I can. And your point about the answer, it's funny. I think there's a kind of level, you get to a level of comfort with yourself as a planner, or a level of proficiency where you realize it's perfectly fine to say I don't know, right?
Absolutely. Because you're human too, it turns out.
Totally. And like you said, there's things where if they ask, well, what about how's your performance lately? If you can't say, if you give a reasonable answer, it means that that's a table stakes question.
Yeah.
But they ask a question or make a statement, or they need for support for something, and the answer is like, that's a very good question. I know the person I'm going to go contact on this, right? No one expects you to be able to pull every answer. And in fact, actually, I think that's got to be negative. That basically someone who thinks they have all the answers in front of someone is going to come off as largely making it up in some cases.
Yeah. And this is a bit of a Mars and Venus thing, right? The value is in having the conversation, because the client actually gets to know themselves. And that's been some of the most interesting thing is clients and prospects have been coming in and saying, we had a very different conversation before this meeting because of the questions that you asked. That's value. You've already delivered value. That's great. So.
Yeah. So, okay. I'm going to go back to the origin of this. I mean, let me take everything I've been doing for all these years and manifest it into something that actually systemizes my platform. What were kind of the goals and objectives when you sought out to do this? Like, what were you hoping to change besides just simply saying, hey, I'm going to give you the turnkey way of approaching this?
Well, I mean, I think everybody in this industry comes at these problems from two sides. One is to legitimately say to advisors just what you just said. I I know what you're trying to accomplish because I talk to you all the time. You have these laudable goals, but it's hard when you're trying to do that across potentially hundreds of clients consistently. And we wanted to provide a solution. But the other driver of it was that we knew that this was right for clients, right? That this was going to create an experience and a process that actually helped people. And so, I think both of those things are driving forces. We see it, we do this research all the time, and we saw these gaps, and it's an interesting and somewhat humbling point to get to in your career where you feel you've got a great product and you're getting great feedback, but you're looking at it and seeing the limitations of it. And that's what was happening is we're doing these surveys, and what could I say, but if you're asking about certain things on that survey, the data is going to be stale a week from now. And that was the truth. So how do we solve for that?
Yeah, fair. So before we wrap up, I have 3 questions I ask everybody on a positive note.
Mm-hmm.
The first question is, if you have one wish for something to change in your company or the industry as a whole, what would it be?
When you ask that question, I tend to go to kind of high level things. And I think that what I'd like to see is a continued evolution of how we think about value delivery. And what I mean by that is we're already on this path. We just have further to go, and seeing value as something that we deliver to a client to something we create with the client. And that's all about co-creation of value. So I think the more that we can embrace true co-creation, which isn't just measuring how we're doing, it's about using input to actually change the experience. I think that's sort of a win-win-win. So I'm hoping we continue down that path.
Absolutely. So the second question I have for you is, what's been the biggest challenge in the platform to where it is to date? I'm going to assume it was the entire career that led to the ability to actually do this, but I'll let you answer.
Well, it's true. I mean, we wouldn't be doing what we're doing if we hadn't done what we did previously. I mean, this did get us to this point. The real answer, when I think you're pivoting, as we were from a professional services firm to a fintech, is the messy middle, the evolution of every single part of the business to deliver in a different way ultimately became a leadership challenge, to be honest, because the whole team is dealing with change, constant change. We're going from here to here. It did not happen overnight. And so some of that human stuff within the business, I think, has been among the most challenging. I think we're cracking it, but it's a challenge.
Again, it's definitely on trend. I mean, it is a challenge. The human side of this versus the number sides of this. There are 2 completely different sides of the coin, and almost in a lot of ways, 2 completely skill sets that appeal to 2 completely different type of people. But the people who fit the Venn diagram nicely, it works really well for them. And then the last question I have for you is, what excites you about what it is you're working on and keeps you getting up in the morning to fight the good fight?
I think I'm just somebody who's hardwired for change and reinvention. So thankfully, because that's what I keep doing. But that excites me, the ability to create something completely new. I would say, though, that inherent in that question is actually something maybe deeper that we all need to think about, because I think so many of us who are tending toward the type A just get up, put our head down and work every day, day and night, without ever asking that question in a deeper way. And I think the older I get, and it is happening, I've been thinking a lot about to what end, right, is all this. So I like that question because I think we just can give a trite answer. But really, honestly, I would have a hard time answering it some days.
It's funny because the curse of the productive person is that, you're really efficient in getting stuff done, but sometimes it's just you don't stop to think about what's going at the beginning of the funnel and why you're bothering.
What is all this about anyway? Yeah, these are great questions for us to think about, though.
I mean, I can get this done in 5 minutes. The question is, should I get it done in 5 minutes, right? And that we don't,
it's
only 5 minutes. It's easy to get it done, right? So
exactly.
It's a challenge. So, Julie, thank you so much for taking the time today. I greatly appreciate this. Yeah, I mean, you've been someone putting out a lot of incredible stuff for the industry for a long time. So your contribution is very much valued, and I'm glad to see you're helping progress that by making it turnkey at this point.
Yeah, well, right back at you, and thanks for having me on.
My pleasure. So that was Julie Littlechild of Absolute Engagement. I hope you enjoyed that, and strongly encourage everyone to take a look at the Absolute Engagement engine. Take a look at simply just understanding the sentiment around your clients. I mean, frankly, something we should all be doing. If you don't know where to start, great place to start. If you're already doing it, frankly, better place to refine them. As always, if you enjoyed this podcast, please leave a review on Apple Podcasts, SoundCloud, Stitcher, Spotify, and wherever you get your podcasts. Until next time, take care.
This podcast was brought to you by Woodgate Financial, an award-winning financial planning firm catering to high net worth individuals and their families. To learn more, go to woodgate.com. You can subscribe to this podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, and Google Play, or find more episodes at jasonpereira.ca.